All right. Hello, everybody. We are live. Welcome. Thanks. It's a normal night and time again. So, thank you for joining me. Let me get a couple things going here. As always, leave your comments, leave your chats. I will explore as we go through the night. You can support this channel by going to patreon.com/Hemant. I appreciate that. You can also subscribe to the newsletter at friendlyatheist.com. If you haven't done that yet, what is going on? Why haven't you done it? All right. We have so many stories to discuss. I feel like it's been a while since I've been able to do this at my normal night and my normal time with my voice back. So I'm excited to talk about so many of these things. I'm going solo tonight. So if you have comments that you leave, I will do my best to get to them between segments. And if you leave super chats or anything like that, I will obviously see those. Otherwise, you're counting on me to scroll through a lot of stuff in between stories. Okay, with that said, let's get things going here in just a second. Let me make sure I have everything I need. We do not have a den here tonight, but we're working out to see if we can get someone who can help me moderate this stuff just so I could see the comments that you guys toss in here. So we'll do our best. Let's start by talking about the Supreme Court this week because they made, look, I know they make a lot of bad decisions, bad rulings all the time now. They made one about religion that was shocking because you would think this Supreme Court is going all in on religious freedom. It's what they do. If a Christian complains about anything, they seem to go out of their way to make sure Christianity trumps the law. Right? So if there's a religious freedom case in front of the Supreme Court, you would think they're going to do everything to make sure a religious person gets what they want. That is not what they did in this case, and it's not good. So here's what happened. There was a case involving a man named Damon Landor. And while this is irrelevant to the story I'm about to tell you, he was in jail because of drug possession charges. This is Damon. And the thing to note about Damon right there is he has very long hair. He is a Rastafarian. He is somebody who has taken something called the Nazirite vow. And one of the things about a Nazirite vow is that you don't cut your hair. It's actually a Bible verse. You could see this right here in Numbers 6:5. During the entire period of their Nazirite vow, no razor may be used on their head, ... They must let their hair grow long. So this is something, even though he's, not technically a Christian, as most people would see it, this is the vow this man has taken. He has not cut his hair in, I think, over 20 years. And the thing is, when you are in prison, you should still be allowed to have your religious beliefs. If you're Muslim and you go to prison, you need to still be allowed to pray 5 times a day. They can't stop you from doing that. And so this man, Damon, in 2020 gets arrested, charged with drug possession. He gets a 5-month prison sentence. And I guess he gets transferred from prison to prison to prison. He's in 3 different places over the course of 5 months. The first 2 prisons, not a big deal. He's in Louisiana, state-run facilities. They respect, even though they have rules in prison about how long your hair can grow, generally they have grooming standards. They don't want you, I guess, to hide stuff anywhere. They want to make sure you're groomed in general. They did let him keep his hair as long as he wanted it to because it was his religion, as they should. That's the law. He gets to the 3rd prison. It's called the Raymond Laborde Correctional Center. And I don't know what Damon heard, but I think he thought this is not a place that respects religious beliefs. Maybe he heard that through the grapevine. But when he got to that facility, the 3rd one, he literally showed them the Supreme Court ruling from years prior that said, hey, you can't cut my hair because it's my religion, it's part of my religion. Here is the legal paperwork that says you cannot cut my hair. I'm showing it to you now. And what happened at that point? Well, the reason they're not supposed to cut off his hair is because the law in question that we are talking about is called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or for short, RLUPA. We've talked before about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Basically, when we talk about religious freedom rulings by the Supreme Court, they're using RFRA to say that Christians, predominantly Christians who have, sincerely held religious views, they can override things like civil rights laws and anti-discrimination laws. Well, in jail, you don't have RFRA, you have RLUPA. So this guy is saying RLUPA protects my hair. He shows them the paperwork. The officers did not care. They literally took the papers out of his hand, threw it in the trash. Then 2 officers basically handcuffed this guy to a chair and they shaved off his head. So when he was in prison there, this is what happened. There he is. They forced him to, they cut off his hair against his will. And that's what this case is about, because Damon sued for damages. You can't regrow your hair magically, but he said, you broke the law, you undermined my rights, so I'm suing you for damages. He wanted damages from the prison. He wanted damages from the individual officers who cut off his hair for violating his rights. And the thing is, the lower courts all ruled against him for various reasons, but the Supreme Court took up his case. And you would think, well, there's no reason for them to take up the case unless they want to reverse and allow Damon to sue those officers. Unfortunately, the decision that came down this week by the 6-3 conservative supermajority is that, no, too bad. You don't get to sue them. You're not allowed to sue those officers. And the argument that Neil Gorsuch made in favor of the officers was so ridiculous that all the legal people I follow were trying to make sense of it because it made absolutely no sense. Here is SCOTUS blog trying to summarize what Neil Gorsuch was saying. In this case, Gorsuch continued, the Louisiana Department of Corrections does not dispute that it is a recipient of federal funds. I'm going to pause for a second. Let me explain this. Everyone involved in this case, pretty much everybody, agrees that Damon's hair should not have been cut off. Everyone agrees that what those officers did violated his religious rights. That's not in dispute. The question is are you allowed to sue the officers over this? And what Gorsuch is saying is, okay, the Louisiana Department of Corrections does not dispute that it receives federal funding and that because it gets federal funding, they got to follow federal law. It has agreed to be sued by private plaintiffs under RLUPA as a condition of accepting those funds, which makes sense. If you're getting federal funds, you got to follow federal law. Everyone agrees on that. But Damon Landor does not contend that the prison officials who are the defendants in his lawsuit have voluntarily and knowingly consented to answer private suits under RLUPA. In other words, what Gorsuch is saying is that these officers, even though they work at a prison that receives federal funding, they did not agree that they had to follow federal law. They did not consent to the idea that if they break the law, they could be sued over it. Come on, you guys. Those officers didn't know any better, so you can't hold them accountable for it. How does that make any sense? Have you ever worked anywhere and broken the law and you're like, oh, I didn't know that was a law. Whoops, sorry, you can't sue me. I was too dumb to know how the rules worked. But that's essentially what Gorsuch is arguing here. So that the long and short of it is Damon Landor is not allowed to get damages from those individual officers because according to Neil Gorsuch, They didn't know any better. They never consented to following the law. It makes absolutely no sense. And look at what the three liberal justices said in response. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, joined by the other two liberals, dissented. She argued that as a result of the majority's ruling, prisoners like Landor, who suffer violations of their religious freedom in state prisons, no matter how blatant, will often be left remediless. And encroachments on prisoner statutory rights are likely to happen with fair frequency, as state empowered prison officials will now have little incentive to abide by federal law, even if it is handed to them on a piece of paper. Yeah, I mean, nailed it. If you know you cannot be sued for violating someone's religious rights, even though you work at a prison that receives federal funding, what's stopping officers from impeding on the religious rights of non-Christians in prison? Everywhere. Like, it makes absolutely no sense to say this. At Slate, their legal reporters summarized it this way. The state officials in this case arguably did agree to be bound by federal law. After all, they signed an employment contract with a prison that receives federal funding by virtue of RLUIPA. State officers are trained on their inmates' rights. Prison litigation has been around for centuries under RLUIPA and other statutes. There's no serious arguments that these state officials were blind to the consequences that might come from violating the rights of the prisoners they are in charge of. It makes no sense to say these officers cannot be held responsible for what they did. It's ridiculous. And Neil Gorsuch, to get a little more technical, he justified his decision by saying his problem is with the way Congress worded RLUIPA. The problem with saying something like that is, have you seen Congress? They're not about to pass law. In a functional democracy, which the United States does not have right now, Congress could come together, edit the law, the RLUIPA law, in like 2 minutes, pass it really quickly, and say, look, of course you got to respect people's religious rights, and if you violate them, yeah, we're going to hold you accountable for it. They could fix it in a minute. You think Mike Johnson is going to do that? You think Republicans in power are going to fix a mistake that is easily correctable? Of course not. So Neil Gorsuch is like, it's Congress's problem. They wrote the law badly, which is his way of saying, I guess no one will ever be able to fix this. Ridiculous. And what makes this infuriating is, again, everyone involved in this situation seems to agree what those officers did to Landor was wrong. It violated his religious rights. Even the conservatives on the Supreme Court admitted that should not have happened, that violated his rights. Even the state of Louisiana said that. Look at the Attorney General, Liz Murrill, who is a conservative Christian mega cultist. We condemn the conduct as alleged in this case and have taken steps to prevent this problem from recurring. But we're grateful the court agreed with the state in this matter. She added that religious rights are deeply important, but who the hell cares what she says after that? This is the same woman who argued that they should put 10 Commandments posters in Louisiana classrooms. They always care about religious rights as long as they're for conservative Christians. But if a Rastafarian wants to have his rights respected, or a Muslim or an atheist wants their rights respected, all of these conservatives are willing to just run right through those laws. Doesn't matter if you're not a conservative Christian. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, they were one of the groups that wrote an amicus brief saying, you got to respect the Rastafarian guy's rights. And this is what they said after the Supreme Court's decision. Today's decision endangers the religious freedom of incarcerated people like Damon Landor, who are particularly vulnerable to abuse and having unnecessary burdens placed on their religious exercise. Once again, we see a court that will bend over backward for the religious freedom of Christians, but allows the government to trample the religious freedom of non-Christians. We can only hope this faulty decision doesn't embolden more prison officials to ignore the religious freedom rights of incarcerated people to observe their faith as long as they don't harm others. And listen, I appreciate that they said that, but when you have to go like, we hope the Christians who run things don't keep violating the rights of non-Christians. I mean, come on, have you seen our government? They'll let Christians do anything they want. They'll let conservative Christians get away with anything they want. That's the takeaway here. Think about what we've seen over the past few years from this Supreme Court. They have rewarded conservative Christians who file religious freedom lawsuits, even when the facts are not on their side. Do you remember Joe Kennedy, the football coach who wanted to hold these big public prayers? Look at me prayers at midfield at football games right after the final whistle. When Neil Gorsuch wrote that opinion in favor of the coach, Neil Gorsuch lied about all the facts underlying that case. Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, included a picture in her dissent saying, like, this is not a private prayer. Look at all these people. Neil Gorsuch lied to help a Christian in that case. Do you remember the story or the case of a wedding website designer in, I believe, Colorado, who said, I want to start a website design company, a wedding website design company, but I'm afraid under Colorado law, if I do that, I might have to make a wedding website for gay couples. And everyone's like, oh, did a gay couple come to you to ask for that? No. Did you even like launch your wedding website? No. Didn't matter. Supreme Court's like, well, we got to make sure she has everything she wants. And here we have a Rastafarian whose story is not in dispute. The violation of his rights are not in dispute. And the Supreme Court's conservatives are like, yeah, it sucks for you. Oh, well, I guess nothing can come of this. Good luck with the rest of your life. Oh my God, it's so infuriating. And if there's no threat of punishment for those officers, which is what the Supreme Court's now saying, then like, what incentive do they have to follow the law? Nothing. I guess in theory, Damon Landor could still pursue a lawsuit through the state courts in Louisiana, but like, you got to start from scratch. It's going to take a long time. The bottom line is the Supreme Court made it harder for a non-Christian to get justice, even when there's no dispute that an injustice occurred to him. And you have to wonder, what would the outcome have been if this was a conservative Christian who wasn't allowed to do the religious thing he wanted to do? What if he wanted to have a Bible in his cell and the officers said no? Do you think they would have said, well, I guess there are no damages here. You got to deal with it? Or do you think they would have found a way to make sure that Christian inmate could have sued the officers? Like, if there are no punishments for violating someone's rights, you don't really have rights. Infuriating stuff. I will pause there. Let me see. What questions do we have here? Looking through by myself. Sorry if I missed stuff. Supreme Court just opened the gates to rampant rights violations with no recourse. That is exactly what has happened. This is another question I was wondering. I bet if he was white, he'd be allowed to sue. I wonder how much race played a factor into this. I haven't seen anything that suggests this had to do with race. It had more to do with religion and the fact that he wasn't Christian than the fact that he's black. But interesting. Anything else here? All right. I am going to go on to the next story. Give me just a second. You guys, I have so many tabs open right now. I don't know what's going on with the ads, by the way. I know you're all complaining about them. I don't have necessarily control over that stuff. Okay. I think it's a new YouTube thing for live streams. Okay. I have an update for you on a story I talked about a couple of weeks ago involving Mormons. And it's a good next step. So you're gonna like the end of this. 2 months ago, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they sued one of their most prominent critics, a guy named John DeLynn, who happens to be the host of a podcast called the Mormon Stories podcast. You could see it right here. And I've said this before, but he does a really good job with his podcast. Anytime there is a Mormon in the news for like anything, especially if they're critical of the church, they talk to John. I have been to parties. I swear to God, I sometimes leave my house, but I've been to like atheist events. And anytime I meet an ex Mormon, one of the things that inevitably comes up is I'm like, oh, do you know John DeLynn? Do you listen to John DeLynn? 100% of the time, they're like, yes. It's often the reason they felt comfortable leaving the Mormon Church because they realized they were not alone. So Mormon Stories has been around for over 20 years. It's grown into its own massive empire, podcasting empire. And a couple of months ago, the Mormon Church sued him because they said he was infringing on their trademark and their copyright. And it was ridiculous. And I'm going to rehash some of why they sued him and then tell you what the update is. So, just to give you a quick reminder of what has happened, in 2005, John DeLynn started Mormon Stories podcast. He was still a member of the church at the time, but he was a member of the church who supported same-sex marriage, which is not allowed in the Mormon Church, and he supported the ordination of women, something that's definitely not allowed in the Mormon Church. And he was open and adamant that the church needed to change and fix this stuff. And also, he's interviewing all these people who are poking holes in the theology. They are talking about the trauma they suffered as a part of the church. And that's why people are listening to him. And it's why they feel comfortable leaving the church. And then in 2015, the Mormon Church actually kicked this guy out. Literally, from this is from the New York Times. Mormon Church expels outspoken critic John DeLynn, the founder and host of a popular podcast for Mormons who question their faith, announced that a 15-member church disciplinary council had unanimously decided to excommunicate him for apostasy. Apostasy! They finally kicked him out in 2015. But whatever, he kept doing his podcast. He wasn't trying to leave. He wanted to fix the church from the inside. They were not happy about that. But since then, this has grown. The Mormon Stories podcast has grown quite a bit. It's grown popular enough that in 2010, John DeLynn launched the Open Stories Foundation, like a nonprofit group that oversees the podcast and does other stuff. And in 2024, they had over $1 million in revenue. So it's a growing little ecosystem who has going there. Now, $1 million is nothing compared to the tens and tens of billions of dollars that the Mormon Church has. You would think, given all of the very legitimate criticism of Mormons from all over the place, the best thing for the church to do when it comes to John DeLynn is ignore him, pretend he doesn't exist. If nothing else, you're avoiding the Streisand effect. But nope. In April, the Mormon Church decided to sue him, and they sued him for very silly reasons. I'll just take you to the introduction of their lawsuit right here. As defendants, John, are well aware, the public associates the term Mormon with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which has used the mark Mormon and other stuff since 200 years ago because it's an ancient religion. Defendants' use of church trademarks and copyrighted materials has caused and will continue to cause individuals to be confused and access defendants' content mistakenly, believing it comes from or is affiliated with or endorsed by the church. Think about that. The Mormon Church is saying, look at his logo right here. Look at our logos on the sides and look at his logo in the middle. He's trying to confuse people. They're going to listen to his podcast, hear all this heresy, and they will think that's us talking. In no real world, in no plausible place, is anyone listening to John's podcast thinking this must be what the Mormon Church believes? That's a ridiculous thing to say. Like the most they could get out of this is maybe some very naive Mormon person was curious about the church, went to their podcast app, searched for the word Mormon, saw John's podcast and started listening to it. But the thing about his podcast is, like, within 2 seconds, you're going to realize, oh, this is not pro-Mormonism. In fact, in this lawsuit, they included, I got to show you this. They included text from comments left on Facebook and YouTube. You got to check this out. They redacted the names, but look at these comments. This is the Mormon Church's evidence for people getting confused by his podcast. I stumbled upon the Mormon Stories podcast thinking it was church affiliated. It was quickly evident how anti it was. Or down here, I was searching for LDS content not too long ago and ran across this and was deceived. I listened to half of one podcast and realized what it was. Never listened again. And if you're reading all this, you know what the takeaway is? The people who listened to the Mormon Stories podcast heard it and then realized it is not pro-church and then decided they didn't want to listen to it. That's not evidence he's deceiving anybody. That's evidence that people who listened in figured out exactly what it was. So where's the deception? There is none. But this is the argument the church is making. At no point in the lawsuit did any of those people say, I spent 5 years thinking the Mormon Church wanted women in the pulpit or they liked same-sex marriage. No one has ever said that. Also, John's podcast is so popular that it's kind of ridiculous for the Mormon Church to cherry pick comments from Facebook and YouTube, right? There's a gazillion comments. You could find anything you want in a comment thread. So anyway, what the Mormon Church wanted from their lawsuit, among other things, they wanted him to change the logo. They wanted him to stop using the word Mormon in all of his branding. But they also wanted a disclaimer. Basically, they wanted him to open his podcast every episode saying, this podcast is not affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is dumb. I don't start this show by saying, hey, everybody, this show is not affiliated with the following 97,000 Christian churches. Why should I open my show with a disclaimer of what I'm not a part of? Right? Doesn't make any sense, even for him. So anyway, this past February, the two sides met to try to hash all this stuff out. They met in person, and John agreed to a few things. He said, look, if there are any images that I was using as thumbnails for my episodes that you think I'm stealing that are copyrighted, I think it's fair use, but okay, I'll change those thumbnails. Fine. He changed his logo from like Mormon blue to orange. Fine. He added the disclaimer to the description of his podcast on all of his social media. What he was not going to do is say the disclaimer at the start of every episode. If anyone wants to read the fine print, fine, it'll be there. But he's not going to open his show saying, this is not what I'm a part of. And then what did the church do? Did they agree to those compromises? No. They decided to sue, which is ridiculous. The funniest thing about all this was the idea that he's not allowed to use the word Mormon for a bunch of reasons. One, the Mormon Church doesn't want to use the word Mormon. Do you remember the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, one of their most famous exports? They no longer call it that. Now it's called the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. A couple years ago, the LDS Church is like, hey, Mormons, stop using the word Mormon to describe yourself. And the funniest thing they said in the lawsuit, I got to show you this one last thing, section 57 right over here. Unless these acts of Mormon Stories are restrained by this court, they will continue, and they will continue to cause irreparable injury to plaintiffs and to the public for which there is no adequate remedy at law. Oh my God. If your podcast can defeat The Mormon Church with its tens and, I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars. Holy crap. May we all have that sort of influence over our enemies. So just a dumb lawsuit all around. Now, at the time when I talked about this story a couple of months ago, John Dehlin issued some informal responses. He said, I've been using Mormon Stories as the name of my podcast for 20 years, and the church never complained until now. So are you mad at me because I exist? Or are you mad at me because, like, the podcast has gotten really popular? Sounds like you're just mad because it's gotten popular and you would have ignored it otherwise. So you don't really have a problem with the name or the color scheme or anything like that, right? He also said, look, I was trying to cooperate with you, but you sued me anyway. What's up with that? And the LDS Church said to journalists, we're not going after him for the content. We're going after him for the way he markets the show. But, like, seriously, does anyone believe that? Do you think they would be suing this guy if his show wasn't popular and influential? They actually said, the Mormon Church said, people are free to express support for or criticism of the church and its teachings. This case does not concern the content of the podcast. Sure it doesn't. I'm sure everyone believes that. Okay. I mean, I would argue there's a stronger case that the Mormon Church could have sued the Book of Mormon musical for misleading people who might have thought they were going to see a musical about Joseph Smith or something. But the church famously did not sue the Book of Mormon musical. In fact, they advertised in the playbill, like, you've seen the show, now come for the real thing. Very clever. I agree. Do you think the Mormon Church is suing Hulu over The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives? Nope. Even though you might stumble across that show and think, ooh, I can learn more about Mormon wives this way. There's, like, those show titles are way more way more of a chance for very gullible people to think they're learning about the Mormon Church. But again, you don't sue over something like that. 2 seconds of watching the musical or the show, and you realize, oh, this is not like temple teachings I am watching here. Okay. So it is amusing to me that, like, Pope Leo is currently fighting fascism around the globe, but the Mormon Church is fighting a podcaster. Anyway, here's the update for you. After all that, Dehlin's team has now issued a formal response in court, and they are calling on the judge to dismiss this entire stupid case. And a lot of the points he mentions are the ones I just told you about. But there are some things he mentions in here that I find really, really interesting. And I want to show you this from his response right here. In this case, the word Mormon has a strong cultural significance far beyond any alleged source identifying function claimed by the church. It's used as a ubiquitous and descriptive reference to Mormonism writ large, including the history, traditions, culture, and people within Mormonism beyond just the church itself. In other words, trying to come after me for using the word Mormon is like going after a Christian podcaster for using the word Christian. It doesn't belong to a church. It belongs to everybody. It describes a lot. So that's a fair point to make. And he has a lot of examples of various articles referencing using the word Mormon to describe things that are not the Mormon Church itself. So that part is interesting. He also mentions at the right over here, indeed, the church itself has publicly declared that Mormon is only a nickname for members of the church and is correctly used in proper names or when used as an adjective. There's one more thing he has in here. You could see it right here. Mormon Stories podcast series uses the term Mormon in the title to signal the subject matter of the series. Stories about Mormonism, Mormon culture, Mormon history, Mormon experiences. There's nothing in the title of the podcast that is overtly misleading or deceptive, which is accurate. It's not like he's saying, come listen to what the Mormon Church has to say. No, these are stories about Mormonism, which is accurate. So that is one of the ways he is fighting back against this, right? One of the other things I have to show you, though, because it's one of my favorite things in this, he mentions that they have known about his podcast for way longer than people might think. It's not like they just found out he has a popular podcast this year. They've known about him for a long time. He said it's impossible for the church to claim it was not aware of defendants' use of Mormon stories for more than a decade before filing the present action. Now, how do you prove something like that? Well, this is fascinating. Look at this in another part of the lawsuit right here. Number 130. On information and belief, on December 8th, 2015, the church's quorum of the 12 apostles, which is not like the leaders of the Mormon Church, but like the B team of the Mormon Church, they held a meeting, which part of which addressed reasons that people leave the church. And on information and belief, a presentation from that meeting included the following slides. Someone leaked the slides from that presentation to people, and they talk about why people are leaving the Mormon Church. And look at this thing. Why do people leave the church? Pornography, chastity, Sabbath. Oh, look at over here. The church has lost its way, or it's deficient. They don't believe the predictions of the Mormon Church. But look at the upper left. When they did their focus groups on why people are leaving Mormonism, one of the things people cited was John DeLynn. Again, John, I'm jealous that you have this kind of influence. To answer the question people are asking, I have no freaking clue what the Denver Snuffer is. That sounds like a true crime podcast character, but I don't know. But again, the Mormon Church's leadership knew who John DeLynn was because literally they discussed him at a meeting, at one of their boardroom presentations where it's all the white guys coming together. They discussed him. So that is kind of an admission that they knew what his podcast was way before they decided to sue. So for some reason, for 10 years, they decided it was fine. Also interesting, if you want to talk about a trademark and all of that, check out what John DeLynn also points out. Guess what happened in 2010? I told you John started his podcast in 2005. In 2010, the Mormon Church trademarked its own podcast about Mormonism. Guess what that was called? It was called the Book of Mormon Stories podcast. So that if you searched, I assume, for Mormon stories, maybe you would come across the church's official podcast and not John's. But I would argue they're infringing on John's copyright at that point, right? He's not making that argument. He's just saying, listen, if we're talking about confusion, the Mormon Church knew about my podcast and they very much stepped into that confusion. So that's a dumb argument. He also pointed out the Mormon Church does not own the color blue that he is using. They don't own the generic light rays design that he's using, which is ridiculous too. And this is what John said in a press release after he filed these responses. According to today's filing, Mormon Stories Podcast and the Open Stories Foundation have included disclaimers indicating its clear independence from the LDS Church since its founding. Mormon Stories' use of the color blue and rays in its branding began well over a decade ago. Did not begin around 2022, as suggested by the church's claims. And he says, we agreed to numerous changes requested by church representatives, including modifications to branding, disclaimers, logos, and imagery. He says, we were surprised to learn that despite accepting most of the church's requested changes, they're still suing us. So, interesting to point that out. So John files this response in court. What is he asking for? What does he say? Just to summarize what his argument is, the church's own documents undermine their argument that all they care about is trademark violation. It's clear they're going after him because of what he does and how effective he is. That's number one. Second thing, he says the 20-year delay for filing a lawsuit against me suggests like you're only doing this because I'm popular. there was never any confusion about what I was up to. You've known about what I do for a long time. He also says it's ridiculous that the church is trying to protect the word Mormon, given that the church has distanced itself from that word. He says the word Mormon is a generic term, that you can't copyright that any more than you can copyright Christian. And also, he has a First Amendment right to criticize the church. This is news to me. I was surprised to look it up and learn that Denver Snuffer is the name of a guy. Someone tell me who the hell this dude is, because right now I'm still imagining a true crime novel. I think to summarize all of this is how you know his show is making a positive difference in people's lives. It shows them that their lives can be fulfilling and wonderful and guilt-free outside the bubble of Mormonism. And you have to think, if this is the way the LDS Church treats a former insider who asks questions and builds community, what do you think they're trying to signal to current members of the church who have doubts, but who are not vocal about them? I mean, the message is clear. If you ever become really good at articulating those doubts, we're not just going to argue with you. We're going to go to court to silence you. And I don't know. I think by picking this fight, the Mormon Church is only confirming all the criticisms people have of it. So I love that John is fighting this in court. I appreciate that he's fighting the good fight. I hope it goes well. There will be more to this soon. We'll find out. Heaven, when are you going to come? Let me build you a streaming setup. Dude, if you're in the Chicagoland area, I welcome anybody who knows what they're doing who can help me out with that. Anything else? Anything else? Looking through any questions here. I do not know what you were talking about here. Why have I been pixelated? Everything looks clean and clear on my end. And it's telling me everything is clear on my end. Please tell me that's not me and everything's smooth on your end too. Otherwise, I will be very sad. Aha! Denver Snuffer caused a schism in the LDS Church and started his own movement. Interesting. I do wonder, and I will look into this in just a second, as I'm checking this out. I'm going to see if I could fix anything. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Screenshots are clear, but I'm pixelated. Why am I pixelated for? Am I pixelated for like everybody? I swear I'm looking at my own stuff and everything seems to be. Everything is showing me it's fine. Why? This is weird. I'm just double checking if there's anything else I can fix. And then I will move on to the next thing. Everything looks fine. All right. Let me know in the comments how I'm coming through for you. Is it clean and clear or is it pixelated and like 240p? You tell me how it's going. And again, I think when I post these clips later, they should be coming out fine. Okay. You know what I want? I want someone who can handle audio and video. I'm looking again. It says 1080p for me. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm going to keep going. Okay. I'm moving on. Give me 1 second here. Why pixel? Why? I don't understand it. Someone's saying it's a bandwidth issue, but again, I'm checking all of my stuff and all the bandwidth stuff says it looks fine. Okay, I'm going to keep going and hope magic happens. Let me move on. I got to tell you about a new lie coming from David Barton, the Christian pseudo historian, and his minion of a son, Tim Barton, who is basically in the same line of work. These guys lie about the history of the United States to convince Christians and politicians that we live in a Christian country that was founded on Christianity, that was influenced by Christianity. And in order to prove their point, they just lie about everything. And I want to show you an example of a lie that they just started telling that is so egregiously annoying to me. And in case you're not familiar with David Barton, this is a guy who claimed back in the day that he had a PhD. He had an earned PhD, and it turned out that was a hoax. He got an honorary PhD from one of those fake Christian colleges. So that was a lie. He once wrote a book about Thomas Jefferson that had so many mistakes throughout the book that his Christian publishers are like, we can't sell this. There are too many lies in it. And they pulled it from the shelves, which one makes you wonder, oh, I got something to tell you about the Bible. But two, the name of this book was The Jefferson Lies. So that was just funny. But like, this guy is so embarrassingly wrong about everything. Even his Christian publishers do not stand by him. Anyway, what's disturbing about David Barton is that he is trusted in conservative Christian and Republican circles. He is a consultant for the Texas State Board of Education when it comes to history shit. And so, like, why? Why? It's because conservatives want someone to say with confidence and by holding up, like, look, I have a primary document that says George Washington would have been a white evangelical Christian. And no one's going to look at the paperwork. No one's going to fact check this. If they could fact check things, they wouldn't be Republican. They would not be going to church. So no one looks into any of this. But Barton has capitalized on the fact that no one calls him out on his bullshit within his circles. And so I want to show you what he did in April at a church in Tennessee. David Barton was speaking there with his son, Timmy. And during their interview with the church pastor, one of the things little Timmy was trying to argue is that all Americans on our 250th anniversary, we owe a debt of gratitude to a preacher named John Wise. And this man, unbeknownst to all of the secular historians, inspired the Declaration of Independence. In fact, John Wise is the reason we have the phrase, all men are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. I want to show you this clip, and then we'll talk about what's going on here.
This is a book with 2 sermons from John Wise. These sermons were actually preached back in the early 1700s, but this was reprinted in 1772 because in one of these 2 sermons, John Wise, and I quote, says, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's in the Declaration. This is also where they got the idea. He taught that God's preferred form of government was the consent of the governed. He taught, and this is in these sermons, these 2 sermons, he taught that taxation without representation is tyranny. Those are all things that show up in the Declaration. This was reprinted by the founding fathers.
Okay, so you heard what he said. I just want to repeat this. He said in this sermon, it says, and I quote, all men are created equal, yada, yada, yada. Here's the thing. Going back to what I said earlier, do you think the natural follow-up question, if I were the pastor moderating this, is, oh, can you show me the page where John Wise wrote those words? That is not what the pastor asked. But it turns out the book he was actually holding up, you could find it online. Here it is, like right here. You could do a search. And that phrase, all men are created equal, certain inalienable rights, doesn't appear anywhere in here. I learned about this through Warren Throckmorton, who I interviewed on this channel. You could look at it on YouTube, but also he's been tracking Barton for many years. He's one of the reasons the Jefferson Lies was pulled from the bookshelves. Warren Throckmorton's been chronicling the lies about Christian nationalism for many years now. He's the one who saw that clip and said, where is it in this book? And here's what Throckmorton says. You will find some of the words, but not exact phrases from the Declaration. Tim Barton held up his copy of Wise's booklet and said he was quoting from it. He was not. Back in May, I challenged Jackson, the pastor, and the Bartons to show the place in the essays where Wise wrote phrases later used in the Declaration. As of this writing, they have not answered. Of course they haven't. Why would they answer their critics? Because the Bartons' entire MO is we're going to lie to Christians and they're dumb enough to believe us. They're never going to question what we say. They're inviting us to write curriculum, right? That the Bartons are liars. If they're not liars, they're dumb and they don't know how to do history. They're not trained historians, so they just make shit up. So the question is, even if they're purposeful liars, or even if they're just really ignorant, why would they do something like this? And I think the answer is obvious. Let me read what Warren Throckmorton wrote. It's designed to mislead audiences and ultimately to influence a political narrative in the present. Christian nationalists want their audiences to believe the US is a nation inspired and created by Christian influences alone. They seem to feel this gives them an advantage in political battles now. If the nation was inspired by Christian principles at the founding, the reasoning goes, then surely it ought to be ruled by Christian principles as they define them now. That's the end game. That's what they are trying to do. If they can convince you we were founded as a Christian country, then whatever conservative Christians believe, we ought to be able to use today. And that is not good news for anyone who understands the founding of our country. And again, all the Bartons need to do to disprove this criticism is show us where these lines appear in the book. Show me the part that you said, and I quote. Just show us where that line is. They won't do that because they never open the books they cite. They never read any of this shit. They're liars. So these are not honest mistakes. It's not like two researchers just overlooked a footnote or misremembered a quotation. This guy held up a book in church and attributed to it a sentence that does not exist. It's the same move pastors make when they say, God wants us to do whatever the hell the Republican Party wants. And like the Bible says that whatever Trump is doing is fine. They know damn well that the people who make up their base are never going to dig into it. And again, this is not new for the Bartons. This is why no actual historians take them seriously, because they are con artists. Their goal is not to understand the founding fathers. It's to rewrite history in a way that elevates conservative Christian goals. That is their mission. They have their conclusions figured out before they ever find the evidence to back it up. And I think they know what Trump knows, that if you tell lies confidently, it's always going to be more persuasive than any verifiable truth. And if you say it often enough, there's no way the fact checkers can keep up. All right, I'm going to stop there on this one. Good time to say go like and subscribe and all that. Any questions here? Looking through really quick. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. I was quoted in a news article recently, a couple of them. All right, I'm going to scooch on. Oh, I'm so excited for this story. All right, give me a second. By the way, one thing I should mention, that Warren Throckmorton pointed out in that previous story is that he says it is entirely possible that the preacher Wise, that he referenced ideas that later made it into the Declaration of Independence. However, there's reason to believe that both Wise and Thomas Jefferson were fans of another writer who may have influenced both of them, but it wasn't Christianity that did it then. It was like another Enlightenment thinker of sorts. Okay. I'm so excited to tell you this story. It's an update on a story I first covered like a year ago, and it involves this young woman over here. Her name is Morgan Armstrong. And when I talked about her last year, she was a high school senior in Tennessee, and she was about to graduate. And she was a star basketball player on her school's basketball team. She was, as far as I know, a really good student. And then just before she was supposed to graduate, the administrators at her school said to her family, "Hey, we need to talk." And the reason they needed to talk was because Morgan had posted this on Facebook: "Cat's out of the bag." And it's pictures of Morgan and her girlfriend. Morgan had turned 18 at the time. She was really excited. She was in love. And she wanted to just celebrate the fact that she was in love with her girlfriend. And this is the first time she was publicly saying she had a girlfriend. But again, those pictures are adorable. It's like prom photos and the like. You know what I mean? And so she posted that on social media for one thing. And the school saw that post. But they saw one other thing as well, because in addition to that picture, in those pictures, Morgan had gone on Snapchat and sent a message to her group of friends where she asked them, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Can you guys like go like my Facebook post? Because I'm really afraid that on Facebook, a lot of my relatives are going to see that picture. And, you know, they're conservatives. I don't think they're going to take very kindly to it. So if you could like the post instead of putting angry emoji on it, it would help me out." This is what she actually said on Snapchat. You could see this right here. "Go like and comment on my post, guys, because if no one on my socials knew I was gay, then they sure as hell do now. So this is a big thing, to be honest. Also, I'm kind of scared about the Facebook comments because I have some ruthless Trump supporting Jesus motherfuckers on there." Which again makes sense. Yeah, if you have conservative relatives in your life who follow you on Facebook, yeah, that could be scary if they're commenting under that post. So someone in her friend circles leaked this private Snapchat message to the administrators at her school. And the reason all of this matters is because, as you've probably surmised by now, Morgan did not attend a public school. She attended Tennessee Christian Preparatory School. And this is one of those schools where they have a rule that homosexual behavior is not allowed. But actually, that wasn't even why she was in trouble. According to the adults at her school, the problem was that she was being really mean to Trump supporters. They said she violated their social media policy by disparaging the bigots because she was being mean. They literally said in a letter to her family, "Morgan posted on social media platforms such as Instagram a disparaging remark reflecting the people at Tennessee Christian. The comment reflected on the institution, faculty, actually they said facility, staff, alumni, and students in the most negative possible way." To which I would just say, if you read a post calling out conservative Christian bigots, and your first thought is, "How dare she talk about us that way?" maybe you're the problem, right? She didn't mention the school. She didn't mention the teacher. She didn't mention her classmates. She correctly pointed out that a lot of people who pretend to be like pious Christians are actually jerks online, which is true. And the school was like, "You're targeting us." Now, the school's policy said students are not allowed to post anything that is threatening, harassing, illegal, obscene, defamatory, slanderous, harassing, bullying, or hostile toward any individual or entity. But she wasn't defamatory and she wasn't slanderous. I don't even think she was hostile. I think she was accurately describing how some Christians online react to things. So, what's the big deal? But it didn't matter because, due to their overreaction, school officials told Morgan, you cannot attend graduation. We'll mail you your diploma. They also said you can't attend your end of the year basketball banquet. And they also threatened to sabotage her future. They said, if you don't fix this, we're going to send proof of what you said to the colleges you might be interested in the future. Like they're going to blackmail her because of this. And again, she didn't slander anybody, but the school basically made it sound like if you want your diploma, you better do what we say. And her parents were kind of shocked by this as well. I want to show you this right here. This is from a news article at the time. This is from the letter they sent her family. Morgan will not comment about the school or people associated with the school. If online slander continues, records of posts and messages will be forwarded to colleges and universities as part of a comprehensive student file. It's in your permanent record, Morgan. If the above are not adhered to, Morgan Armstrong's diploma will be withheld and not mailed in June. And her mom says, I was shocked and then I went to anger. And by the way, kudos to Morgan's parents who, throughout all of this, have been super supportive of their daughter. And that's not something that happens all the time. So that is what they said last year. That is when people found out about this. But here's the thing. The school, you would think, okay, she goes to a Christian school. They're allowed to set their rules. I can think the rules are dumb, but the Christian school is allowed to set the rules. However, the school made a big mistake because according to the student handbook says if you violate their social media policy the first time, the punishment is a 1-day in-school suspension. That's it. This was the first time Morgan got in trouble. And they were not giving her a 1-day in-school suspension. They were like, we're not going to give you a diploma. We're not going to let you walk across the stage of graduation. You can't go to your banquet. We're going to blackmail you to your colleges, etc. Like completely past the line where they've completely crossed the line at this point, which means the school is ignoring its own rules. And I know, I see the question, why would people send her? Why would her parents send her to a Christian school like this? I'll answer that in a second. But in any case, because the school wasn't even following their own rules, Morgan and her family decided to file a lawsuit against the school last year. And they said the letter falsely insisted she was insulting people. Look at number 35 over here. Nothing in Morgan's public post was vulgar, disrespectful, or slanderous, and the post doesn't refer to the school in any respect. What the hell? Fair point. They also said, like her private Snapchat request, it wasn't about the school either. Look at this, number 38. Nothing in this private Snapchat message referenced was intended to reference anyone at the school. Instead, Morgan's statement describing some ruthless Trump-supporting Jesus motherfuckers referred to members of Morgan's own family with whom she was connected on social media. People who, in Morgan's view, profess but do not practice Christian principles of love, acceptance, and compassion. And I love that line because they're saying we love Christians, but also, yeah, there are some really bad Trumpy Christians out there. And I got to say, it's kind of something that Morgan and her parents are saying, listen, we all got people in our families who suck. Gotta love that in a lawsuit. So this is their lawsuit. And I'm going to scroll down here. This is the part that it really boils down to, number 52 and onward. Even assuming, for the sake of argument, that Morgan actually violated the school's social media policy, she did not, and was not disciplined pretextually for being gay, she was. Because Morgan had never before been disciplined for violating the social media policy, the maximum consequence that the defendant could permissibly impose, was minor, a 1-day in-school suspension. Nevertheless, in its haste to suspend Morgan for being gay, the school violated its own policy and summarily imposed a long-term suspension instead. As a result, Morgan was forbidden from attending school from that point forward, not allowed to take final exams, etc. As someone is pointing out, the school is admitting that they are Christian MFs. Yes. So I don't know what they thought was going to happen here. Why would you punish one of your best students for something so harmless? And instead of giving Morgan the send-off she deserved as a high school senior, they ruined the end of her high school experience. So their lawsuit, the family's lawsuit ended. Like, what are their demands? They said, if the school loses this case, we want the suspension removed from her permanent record. We want her to be able to take the final exams because they might boost her grade point average a little bit. We want you to give her the damn diploma she has earned, stop threatening her college prospects, and pay for all the legal fees that we have to deal with. Now, I will say the school said we won't count the final exams for her. And then she graduated and nothing happened. And so it's like, okay, the final exam thing is moot. The school said at the time, we firmly reject the misleading allegations outlined in a recent lawsuit supposedly filed against the school. But as we were saying, the whole incident suggested everything Morgan had said about certain Trumpy Christians was true. These institutions are hotbeds of bigotry. They have no love for LGBTQ students. They pressure students to suppress their emotions. They make a big deal over little things. They ignore very serious problems. Like, why would you do it? And one thing I just want to mention briefly is when all of this happened, when the lawsuit was filed, Morgan's people in her community, they came out and held a private graduation ceremony for her at like a local, I don't know if that's her house or somewhere nearby, but they held a little private graduation ceremony on the streets to show their support for her, which I thought was adorable. So that's kind of amazing. A protest/graduation party. Last year, when all of this happened, I talked to Morgan on the phone and I asked her some of the questions I know some of you are asking right now. Number one, why did you end up attending a Christian school like this? And the answer she gave me, especially because it seems like both she and her parents were pretty progressive Christians, if they were Christians at all. And she said the answer was pretty straightforward. They promised her a spot on the basketball team back in middle school, and they offered to give her a partial scholarship if she went there. She was recruited to go there. And so she's like, okay, whatever. Like, if you're giving me money and I get to play basketball, I'll go. Honestly, I get that. I totally understand why you would go there. It's the same reason Liberty University, the Jerry Falwell School, Liberty University recruits a lot of really talented athletes. And you might wonder, why would these athletes want to go to Liberty? Do they have any clue what happens at Liberty University besides Jerry Falwell's wife? And the answer is honestly, no. I don't think they're looking into how Christian a Christian school is. They're just like, you're giving me a full ride to play football, play basketball. Yeah, I'll go here. Maybe you're the only offer I'm getting. I get that. So that's why she went to the school. And also, I should point out, it's not like she went in defiance of it being Christian. Her family is Christian, but they're not like super conservative Christians. They just figured, oh, it's a Christian school. I'm sure our values align. Do we believe in Jesus? Yes. And then they didn't really care about the fine print, right? I did ask Morgan last year as well. So how do you feel about Christianity now? And she said this situation, quote, definitely didn't help. I also wondered, I asked her this, Morgan, why did you post these pictures on Facebook in April? Why didn't you just wait until like June to post the, like graduate and then, go live your life, go have fun? And she said, and I really appreciated that she said this, She said, look, she's known for years that she's attracted to other girls. She also knows her school disapproves of it, but also her straight friends post pictures of their boyfriends and girlfriends all the time. How come she couldn't? And she said, quote, I didn't want that fear to hold me down anymore. So she posted the pictures. And that's why she filed the lawsuit. She said, even if the school's not going to change their stance on homosexuality, and even if she doesn't get anything out of this, she didn't want them to target future students who might be in the same predicament. And she did get a lot of calls of support from former students at the school who are now openly LGBTQ. So she wanted like this cycle to end. She did tell me, though, that a lot of her friends at school, like in her grade or in high school, they mostly stayed away from her after all that happened last year. They blocked her on social media. They didn't want to talk to her for the rest of the year, which kind of sucks. So yeah, that was bad. And that was, even though many of them had known she was gay for years, they still distanced themselves from her. The one person who remained by her side, though, was her girlfriend, because you can imagine it must have been hard to watch your girlfriend go through this, but her girlfriend was super supportive. When I talked to her last year, I asked her, where are you going to go to college? She wasn't sure. She didn't know if she'd be playing basketball. I just hoped she would be going somewhere where she was accepted. Okay, there is our recap. What is the news? Why am I sharing this story with you again now? Well, her lawyer just posted a press release earlier this week. And I want to just show you the headline of the press release. Tennessee Christian Preparatory School ordered to rescind Morgan Armstrong's suspension will pay her $10,000 for suspending her following her coming out post. I'm going to get into that in just a second, but let me scroll down here. This is her lawyer. School is a place where every student is entitled to feel welcome, accepted, and supported. It's not a place where any administrator should feel comfortable disciplining or threatening kids for being gay. We were proud to represent Morgan and her family in this righteous lawsuit, and we're thrilled to have prevailed on their behalf. We hope Morgan's bravery will inspire others to stand up for themselves the way that she did. Holy shit, that's amazing. So what exactly happened? Here's what happened. This case was going to court. All the people involved, they had their depositions. This thing was like going to go to trial. And the two sides tried to meet up to see, can we resolve this before it goes to trial? And the school, I think, this is me speculating purely, I think the school realized they were in the wrong. And they were like, we don't want to be found guilty in court of violating the law. So why don't we just say we're not admitting to any fault, but we'll give you everything you want and we'll call it a deal. And that's basically what happened. So here's what the school said. The two sides said, we agree to disagree on whether she violated school policy. Okay, fine. But they did remove the suspension from her permanent record. Even if you think that doesn't really matter anymore, she graduated. They said, we're rescinding the suspension. They said, we promise we will never trash Morgan to any future colleges or universities. We'll never do it in the future. And by the way, we haven't done it yet. And they said they would pay $10,000. You might think that's for legal fees, but actually her lawyer worked for free. So why $10,000? Because that's essentially the cost of tuition for 1 year to go to this school. So they basically paid back tuition for her senior year, even though she received a partial scholarship. I talked to the lawyer and he told me, quote, this is as good a result as, perhaps an even better result than, the court system could have provided in a litigated judgment. Paired with the rescission of her suspension, her receipt of her diploma, and the permanent injunction involved, this was a total spectacular win. That's what the lawyer told me. And then I got another update for you. I spoke to Morgan on the phone yesterday. as I'm recording this. Hadn't talked to her for the past year, but I wanted to catch up. I wanted to know what she thinks of all this. She told me she was just glad this is over. It's taken up a lot of space in her head over the past year, as you can imagine. She is going to college. She's going to college online. She's working a full time job, but she told me she's moved out of her city. She's kind of made a clean break from everything from high school, the area she grew up with, even the friends she had who weren't friends with her at the end of the year. She's just kind of moved away from all that. What about her girlfriend that she had last year? They are still together and they're doing very well. I asked her about how she felt about her Christian faith. Was she still a Christian these days? Uh, and she told me, I'm still questioning. If you ask her, like, where on the fence are you? She might be leaning on the non believing side, but whatever. Like, she doesn't have to make a decision on that. I would say, like, if your interactions with Christians are the kind she has had over the past year, I kind of get that. I thought some of her friends who went away from her last year, I thought some of them might come around. Like, has she talked to her friends? Have they said, I'm sorry for like not being on your side last year? Sadly, the answer was no. They're still like, they haven't reached out since. That's kind of sad. But she told me she's made peace with it. What's done is done. And she's moving on, which I love that for her. The one thing she did want me to correct is she's seen a lot of social media chatter of people saying she did this for attention or she did this for money. None of that is accurate. None of the money was guaranteed. That was the school's offer now, by the way. The only reason she went through the lawsuit, she told me, quote, it was about standing up for what happened. My only goal was to clear my record. So I'm just so proud of her. Like, I'm so happy that this is the outcome she got. She's vindicated, and couldn't be happier to see that ending. All right, I'm going to stop there. Let me see if there's any other questions here. I wish mainstream news covered more shit like this. I do too. This is such a nice, wholesome, happy story. I hope she sends them a pretty card thanking them for the 10K. She won't, but I like the way you think. I think that would be hilarious. Maybe she could post it as a Facebook comment, as a Facebook post or something. All right, I'm going to scroll down. Someone said, I can't believe people even use Facebook, especially young people. I got to tell you, way more people, to my shock, use Facebook. And I've started to use Facebook more because there's a big audience there that doesn't use, the real parts of the internet. All right, I'm going to jump to another story. Oh my God. That's how she should end her letter. Love it. Okay. I don't know if you've heard the next story, so give me a second to pull this up here. At some point before the night ends, I will tell you all about hiking. All right. I just told you a story about an out high school student, now college student, who got vindicated. I'm going to now tell you a story about a legal outcome that is kind of the opposite in the worst way. And it involves this woman right here. Her name is Diane Hensley. You could see it right there. She is from Texas. She is a justice of the peace. And I have been following her case since 2019. She's been around in the news for the past like 7 years. And the reason is back in 2019, she decided, like, if you're a justice of the peace as a judge, you're allowed to perform weddings as a side hustle. People might want a court wedding. You got to say some words, sign some paperwork, you make some money off of it. Again, a lot of judges do this sort of thing. What you can't do is say, yeah, I'll sign your wedding certificate and say whatever you want, unless you're blank. Like, you can't discriminate against people that way. But she said, I'm not doing any same-sex weddings. And Again, she's a public official. She's not a priest. She's not allowed to say, everyone's allowed to get married and I will do the ceremony for you unless you are gay. And at the time that she said that, she was actually given a warning by the Texas Commission on Judicial Misconduct. This is from 2019. The Texas Commission on Judicial Misconduct said Hensley's actions should be publicly warned for casting doubt on her capacity to act impartially to persons appearing before her as a judge due to the person's sexual orientation. And this is a very good point. If you are a gay person who is in front of her in court, you might legitimately think this lady is not going to give me a fair shake because I'm gay, because I already know she doesn't do gay marriages, gay weddings. And that was the concern. So they didn't really do anything. They gave her a slap on the wrist. They sent her a warning letter. And they just said, like, hey, don't do that because people might think you're unethical. And we know you're ethical, but you can't make people think you're not. So what did Hensley do in response to that? Well, she did a totally normal thing. She said, yes, that is a fair point, and I will never do such a... No, I'm just kidding. Here's what she did. 2019, Texas Justice of the Peace files lawsuit after reprimand for accommodating same-sex marriages. And all of this strikes me. Do you remember the story about the San Francisco Giants pitchers who refused to wear, who didn't want to wear the pride gear on Pride Night, so they wrote Bible verses on their hats, and Major League Baseball said, hey, you can't, write messages on your uniforms, and they're like, how dare you attack us for being Christian? It's like, that's not at all what they said. And in this case, she's like, did you tell me people might perceive me as unethical? I'm going to sue you for that. So not kidding. She filed a lawsuit. And she said they have substantially burdened her free exercise of religion. This is what group is this? First Liberty. In its lawsuit, First Liberty argues the commission violated the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act by investigating and punishing Judge Hensley for recusing herself from officiating at same-sex weddings. ... By doing that, the state of Texas has substantially burdened the free exercise of her religion with no compelling justification. First of all, that's a lie. They do have justification. The justification is gay people might think she is unfair to them. That's a very legitimate concern if your one job is judge. Also, my God, may we all have the most substantial burden on our beliefs being, hey, maybe treat people nicely. Jesus. So she filed a lawsuit over this. It was a very Kim Davis thing to do, where it's like, your job as a government official, you got to follow the law. Here's a judge saying, I'm not going to follow the law. It's ridiculous. So she said, I want $10,000 in damages because that's how much money I would make for my side hustle. And by not performing weddings at all, which is what you're forcing me to do, because I will not do same-sex weddings, by forcing me not to do it, I'm missing out on thousands of dollars. So she said she wanted $10,000, and she also wanted the ethics court, the commission, to say everyone should be allowed to say no to same-sex weddings if your religion commands it. Now, in 2021, a judge tossed out that case on technicalities. An appeals court later said, yeah, we are tossing out this case as well. But Hensley is like, I'm going to keep appealing. We're going to go to the Texas Supreme Court because those are my buddies. Because, conservatives. And in 2023, the Texas Supreme Court took up her case. And who was her lawyer during all of this? She was not representing herself. Her lawyer was a guy named Jonathan Mitchell. And Jonathan Mitchell is famous for one thing. I want to show you this, if I can find it here. Jonathan Mitchell is famous for being the guy who... he's the former Texas Solicitor General who fought for the abortion bounty law. Like if a woman goes to get an abortion, but you turn her in, we'll give you money. Like, he's that guy. And his argument was that she had every right to discriminate against people. This is how he argued her case. If I could show you this right here. Mitchell further argued that state law protects people's religious freedom unless there's a furtherance of a compelling government interest. Yeah, the government interest is civil rights apply to everybody. He said it also prohibits wedding officiants from discriminating based on race, national origin, or religion. But absent from that list is discrimination on account of sex or sexual orientation. It is still permissible for wedding officiants, whether they are judges or members of the clergy, those are not the same thing, to discriminate based on any other characteristic as long as it's not race, national origin, or religion. Do you realize the argument from her lawyer is, yeah, she's a bigot. Of course she discriminates, but she discriminates against the right people, so it's fine. This is Texas. That's his argument on her behalf. So, when you're a Christian, you're allowed to do it. They let you get away with it. She's allowed to be an anti-gay bigot. She just can't be a racist bigot. Don't you guys see? Even though those are both things you don't choose for yourself. Anyway, she could have avoided all this by just not doing wet marriages. But no one was forcing her to do it. She did it anyway. Now she wanted to get paid for signing marriage certificates for straight couples and not gay ones. And she thinks her religion should allow her to do that. I don't know. It was a dumb lawsuit, but it made its way to the Texas Supreme Court. Quick side note, because when I was doing research on this lady, there's an article that came up from the Dallas Morning News, and they included a fascinating tidbit about Diane Hensley. Hensley said her older brother, who died of ALS, was gay. After he had a falling out with their parents over what she described as economics, Hensley said she hired a detective to track him down once a year and take a photograph as a gift for their mother. One year he was in Paris, another year in Japan, then Dubai. That's not a feel-good story. This lady hired a detective to stalk her brother, who wants nothing to do with her family, to take a picture from a distance like it's a spy movie and send it as proof of life to her parents. Holy shit, this whole family is messed up, except for the brother, who clearly gets it. So this lady is like cuckoo bananas, creepy crazy. Anyway, her lawyers basically said she should have a religious right. My concern was, if the Texas Supreme Court ruled in her favor, what else would they allow people to do in the name of Christianity? There was also an interesting development in this case later on, which is the Texas Supreme Court changed the rules of judging. Literally, they changed the rules, and they changed one line specifically. Look at this. They changed the rule that says, how should judges conduct their extrajudicial activities? So if you're not on the job, but maybe you're performing weddings as a side hustle, how are you supposed to act? And they made one rule change right here. They said, it is not a violation of these canons for a judge to publicly refrain from performing a wedding ceremony based upon a sincerely held religious belief. They literally changed the rules to accommodate her Christian bigotry, which you would think, I mean, one, that's stupid, but two, you would think that makes the entire thing moot. And that's not a ruling on her case. That's just a rule change that gives her everything she ever wanted, right? It was infuriating. This is how they do things in Texas. So think about what that means. Think about what that means for gay couples. On paper, according to the law, you are free to get married if you choose to. But the Texas Supreme Court is saying if a judge doesn't want to perform your ceremony and sign the documents, they don't have to. It's state-sanctioned discrimination. But Diane Hensley was like, that's nice, but I want money. And this week, actually, I should say last week, they finally ruled, like this case got sent down to a lower court again, and I want to show you the ruling here. Diane Hensley versus the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. Final judgment. Look at this. The court awards relief to Judge Diane Hensley under the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act as follows. The commission shall pay compensatory damages to Diane Hensley in the amount of $10,000. The Ethics Commission, the people whose job is to make sure judges are seen as fair and impartial, they got to pay her $10,000. Why? Because they said, hey, you might be doing something unethical. That's it. $10,000. Also, they're never allowed to investigate, sanction, or discipline her over being a Christian bigot. And, look at this. The commission has to pay her reasonable attorney's fees, court costs, and other reasonable expenses in the amount of $630,000. So this lady is getting $640,000 because she's like, I want to be a bigot. And the commission said, I don't think you can be a bigot. And she's like, but I'm a Christian, so I'm going to sue you. And now the good guys have to pay her $640,000 because that's it. That's how the law works now in Texas. It is infuriating. I mean, this is the headline from the Christian Post right here. Texas judge who refused to officiate same-sex weddings wins $640K legal victory. And at the very bottom of this article, this is First Liberty again, the Christian conservative legal group. Although the Hensley litigation has concluded, the commission is still facing a statewide class action lawsuit on behalf of other justices of the peace who were also unwilling to perform same-sex marriages and stopped performing weddings entirely to avoid disciplinary action from the commission. Let's pause there. There are other people just like her who said, oh, Diane's getting paid? Diane could sue over this? We all want to sue over this. So they filed a class action lawsuit because they want in writing that they can be bigots because they are Christian. So we're waiting on that. And by the way, they're seeking damages in the tens of millions of dollars of income lost by justices of the peace throughout the state. These people just want to steal taxpayer dollars that they think they are owed because they are Christian bigots. There's another thing I got to show you somewhere here. Where did it go? Oh, yes. Who else celebrated this decision? Attorney General Ken Paxton, the most corrupt man in Texas, now running for Senate, who said, Judge Hensley always adhered to the law. Oh, I'm sorry. I lied. Let me take that back. Her legal team, thanked Ken Paxton for guiding them throughout this thing. That was Ken Paxton. He didn't say anything publicly about this. I don't think he wants to draw attention to it, but they thanked him specifically for being part of this. And this is what her legal defense people said. Check this out. This is from First Liberty Institute right here. Judge Hensley always adhered to the law and the legal guidance provided by the Attorney General of Texas. We are grateful that this case is concluded and that Judge Hensley was vindicated, which is an easy thing to say when you can swim in $630,000 for being assholes. So, I mean, the amount of money they are giving this woman is so... It says that you can do whatever you want as long as you're Christian. Even if you're a judge, even if you're supposed to stand for equality under the law, this woman and all the people around her have decided religion, and let's be honest, only their religion, supersedes the rules everybody else has to follow. Also, they can discriminate against people who are already struggling to protect their rights throughout the state of Texas. By the way, Hensley, she has also filed a separate federal lawsuit trying to overturn Obergefell, the Supreme Court case that makes same-sex marriage legal nationwide. I guess she figures, well, I've already done damage to gay couples in my state. Let me harm gay people even more. So that's what she's up to. No wonder her brother ran away from the whole horrible family. I will stop there. Any questions here? No kidding. If Paxton is celebrating, you are doing something wrong. No kidding. I agree. Man, if you're living in Texas, all of you who are living there, don't just vote for Tallarico. You should be volunteering for his campaign and making sure he's doing everything possible to win that race. All right, I'm going to jump to another story. Give me 1 second here. I got a couple more for you tonight. Ah, yes. Okay. I have a story with some good news, maybe ish at the end of it. We'll see. Let me pull this up right here. Okay. I got to tell you about this guy right here. His name is Silas Shelton. And I actually first talked about him on this live stream like in 2023. And this guy, the picture I showed you there, is when he appeared in front of the Little Miami Local School District Board of Education in Ohio, and he was complaining about their book fair. He was complaining about the book fair because his daughter attended the book fair and she saw a book that made him very, very upset. The book was called Heartstopper. One word, Heartstopper. It's by Alice Oseman. And in the book, it has two teenage boys meet in class and they develop a relationship that involves hand holding, hugging, and like a little bit of kissing. It's a love story. It's like a young adult graphic novel. But it's a popular book. Netflix did a series based off of Heartstopper. But Silas Shelton realized that book was on the book fair shelves and he got very upset about it. And I want to play for you a clip of what he said to the school board in 2023. The audio is not great, so I've included subtitles for you.
You guys just had a little book fair. My 12-year-old daughter came home from, and I'm a guy that I don't think kids should ever question their sexuality. I don't think kids should ever explore their sexuality. I don't think any of that stuff ever ought to be in our school. But she come home asking me why certain books were in that book fair, which were pertaining to books of gay. One of them was Heartstopper, which is where a gay boy pressures a straight kid into kissing him. I don't understand why we have this kind of stuff in our libraries, in our book fairs. I mean, just the Mayo Clinic discussion on health risk of being gay. We could go on a whole bunch. I ain't gonna do it, guys. I can tell you, I got sick reading that stuff today. And I'm gonna tell you this, that nobody in this board will stand, nobody in the school system stands. I don't know what we actually stand for. I really don't. It isn't a religion matter. It isn't. It's a health risk. It's mental health. The last thing I'll say, and you all know where I stand, but you better tie a little down around your neck and you put up the leg and lead it to the astray.
So he's quoting the Bible at the very end there, that implying that these people are leading kids astray because, oh no, hand holding, same-sex hand holding, that will destroy their mental health. There was a news article about this at the time, and this is what they quoted Silas. "It's more than foul language," said Silas Shelton, who was the father of a middle school student. "There's so much sexual innuendo, especially in Heartstopper." And the sad thing about this, actually, I got one other thing. After he said all that stuff to the school board, he also posted this on Facebook. 5 reasons Scholastic can't be trusted with your kids. And he basically showed images from graphic novels, implying that if you basically do any sort of love story that involves gay people, this is going to traumatize your children. Brave Books, by the way, is a right-wing book publisher that works with all the right-wing people. So he posted that because you can't trust Scholastic and their book fair. And the sad thing about all of this is that it worked. A couple weeks after he made that speech, look at the headline: Cincinnati Enquirer 2023. Heartstopper books about gay student lead to shorter book fair at Ohio school. A Southwest Ohio school district says it will scale back an annual book fair after receiving complaints about selling a book series that centers around a boy who is gay. So when I say they scaled it back, what they did is they said, we'll put together a special committee to screen all the material that is at the book fair, as if you need watchdogs to monitor children's books to make sure they're not spreading gay cooties. They said the book fair could continue. However, it'll only happen on like the 2 nights of parent-teacher conferences, but definitely not during the day when students can browse the books at their leisure by themselves. It was a 10-day book fair. They condensed it to 2 nights when parents were around. Like, they capitulated to this guy's desire for censorship. And the thing about Silas Shelton is he's also the pastor of a local church. Yes, he loves Trump. Yes, he preaches about God and why everybody needs to believe. And can you already guess where this story is going? Can you? You probably can, right? Because in October of 2025, last year, guess what happened? Here's a post from the Wilmington Police Department in Ohio. Let me just I'll share this with you right here. I don't think this reveals anything. This is from the police department. The Wilmington Police Department announces the arrest of Silas H. Shelton in connection with an ongoing sex offense investigation. He was taken into custody. He is charged with, oh my goodness, rape, sexual battery, unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, and gross sexual imposition. ... They didn't say anything more at the time, but yeah, that's exactly what happened. And guess what the Cincinnati Enquirer did with that story? Ohio pastor who protested LGBTQ book at school fair accused of that. Shelton is being held on a $2 million bond. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, according to online records. For each charge, a county website listed a 2019 date as to when each violation is alleged to have occurred. Oh my goodness. So here's the story as the police explained later on. Apparently, in the fall of 2019, this guy begins inappropriate contact with a girl who was like 14 or 15 years old. Apparently, she and her family were members of this guy's church congregation. And apparently the abuse occurred until 2025. It was going on for years. And according to the police, the young woman felt groomed, trapped, and manipulated due to Shelton's position as a religious authority. The detective indicated that the alleged abuse occurred at Shelton's home, at a nearby lake, and in local hotel rooms. So a couple things about all this. The victim was about the age of the daughter he wanted to protect from the evil, evil gay book. That's what he was doing while he was saying that to the school board. Shelton, by the way, in case you were thinking about it, he is not a drag queen. He is not transgender. He's not an immigrant. He is not gay. He is a straight, white, Christian, Republican child sex predator. Like, guys like him have spent how many times have we seen stories like this where guys like him, they rail against love, they hide behind the Bible as if that's supposed to mask their bigotry. And the louder they scream about how they got to protect kids from homosexuality, the more certain you can be assured that they're hiding something. Very much the Jackson Lammeyer type of thing that we learned about last week. So, religion didn't make this guy righteous. It just made him a threat who was hard to say no to. Being a pastor made it harder to hold him accountable, right? And that was only one victim. I don't know if there was anybody else. But the reason I bring all this up, because again, he was arrested last October. I think that's the last time I talked about him. But guess what just happened very recently? Where did it go? Oh my God, give me 1 second. I had it pulled up and now it's gone. I'm going to find it. Here is the news. Let me share this with you right here. Check out this headline. Former Blanchester pastor sentenced after pleading guilty to sex charges involving minor. And let's just look here. Last sentence. This week, Shelton was sentenced to serve 15 years in prison. He will also be required to register as a sex offender for 25 years. So there we go. That's the news as of today. This guy's going to jail. The guy who spoke in front of a school board and said the real harm to children was a graphic novel that showed two same-sex boys holding hands. That guy is now going to jail for, I don't know how to say it here, sexually abusing a little girl. He's the guy we need to watch out for. It's not the books, it's not gay people, it's not trans people, it's not drag queens, it's white Christian Republican men, because they're the ones you should assume the worst about. Let them prove you wrong. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's your, like I said, is that a happy ending? I don't know. There's nothing good about this story, but at least this guy's being put away. And again, side note, called out for the hypocrite that he is. All right, I will stop there with this story. Any other questions here? Fair question. How do we know he's not abusing his daughter as well? We do not know anything else about what he's doing. Projection is one hell of a drug. We've seen this for how many decades now? All of them. All of them. Yeah. All right. I'm going to jump to one last story here that I'm kind of excited to talk about. Give me one moment. Okay. Evan, did you find this by doing the last 24 hours pastor arrested game? Yeah, I have my Google alert set for pastor and arrested, and every 4 minutes I get new emails, and it's how I find 98% of my stories. God, if I had an actual Google alert for that, I've talked about this on the podcast before. I normally don't talk about pastors who get charged or convicted of sex crimes, even against minors, because dime a dozen, it happens every damn day. I can't keep up. So unless it's something like this, where the hypocrisy is so obvious, I tend not to cover them. There are too many. Okay, I got one last story for you here. This is a story that I started following for a very different reason. And when I saw the update today, I was kind of shocked, but this takes so many turns. So if you're watching this later on, go with me on this journey, if you will. I'm going to tell you a little personal story about myself. If you've watched this live stream, if you've ever listened to me before, I love hiking. I got into it several years ago, and my idea of a good day of hiking is I want to hike somewhere where the scenery is beautiful and my legs become jello and I cannot walk anymore. And then at the end of the day, I can go back to a real hotel and take a real shower and go out to eat Mexican food or something. Like that's a good day. So I love hiking. Started doing it years ago. I wasn't good at it. As you could clearly, I know this will come as a shock. I don't normally work out, but I enjoyed doing it. And after I started hiking a little bit, I'm like, I want to go on longer, bigger hikes because these are awesome, especially if you're in the right place. And I started looking up all the national parks and like, where can I go to find the best hikes? And there were a couple that were on every single list you would ever come across. One, like number one is Half Dome in Yosemite. Like number two, and sometimes they're switched, is Angel's Landing in Zion National Park in Utah. And there were other ones in Glacier. There were other ones across the country. But like everyone said, like they're scenic the whole way through. They are grueling. They will take everything out of you. They're so popular, you need to get permits in advance to like complete the hikes. And it sounded awesome. So a few years ago, I entered the lottery to get a permit to do Angel's Landing. And I want to show you this about Angel's Landing. If you've never been to Zion, this is Zion. It's a beautiful place in Utah. This is the beginning of the hike. Like you are walking along this, and that mountain, the top of that mountain right there is Angel's Landing right there. You're going to walk from where that guy is at on the bridge all the way up there. And not only that, as you walk up, I'm totally doing an advertisement for Zion. As you walk up, you are walking on the right side of this image, like you are walking toward the screen here. That's the view you get on a boring part of the hike. It is gorgeous. You're walking up there, and at some point in this hike, let's say you have been walking for a really long time. It's several miles. You're exhausted. It's uphill a lot of the way. I think I have asthma, so that doesn't work well for me, but I do it anyway. You finally get close to the top, and what do you see? This right here. You are walking right over here on the curves, and because there's no easy way to get from down here to up there, years ago, like 100 years ago, they carved this curvature. It's called Walter's Wiggles into the rock so that you could climb up to the top of the, like, now you would think, oh, once you climb up that, you're at the top of that mountain I showed you earlier. No, now you are at the bottom of that top section. If you go up the curves, now you are at the part where they say, if you want to go any further, we need to see your permit. And I'm like, cool, I have my permit. Let me keep going. So the day I got the permit, it's been a couple of years now. I had my permit. The weather was beautiful the day I went, which I lucked out in that sense. And the thing that happens once they allow you to proceed, you see something very different, which is basically this right here. At this point, once they let you past it, you are hiking uphill on a very steep area, and there's just a chain. So I had my gloves, and I'm like holding on for dear life. It's not like there's no space there. You could see that person is climbing. You can move, but it's not great. Am I afraid of heights? I am definitely afraid of heights. This was not like easy to do. And mind you, you've already been hiking for hours at this point. It keeps going like this for a while. Like, and there are parts where there are no chains, so you're just going super slowly. It is hard, it is scary, but like this is what it looks like as you are getting through to certain sections of it. Again, it's hard, it is intense, but you look around, and I know you're looking downhill, but it's so beautiful. This is why I wanted to do it. And if you can make it to the top of this area, that's essentially like the view you get to see. You could sit at the top of that mountain. You can eat your lunch. There's a lot of people there, and you get to look over this beautiful landscape. It's gorgeous. This is another picture just of a dude. He's standing. I swear it's not as scary as that picture makes it look, but like you are there. I did this. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever hiked. And since then, I have done Half Dome. Didn't finish it all the way. That's a different story. But it's beautiful. I would go back there in a heartbeat. That's Angel's Landing. Okay. So before I was going to go to Angel's Landing, of course, I'm doing my research. I want to make sure I'm bringing the right equipment. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything stupid. Also, I want to make sure that I'm not going to do anything real stupid, because that is not a safe hike. It is very dangerous. When they say it's one of the most beautiful hikes in the country, that's true, but it's also on every list of the most dangerous hikes in America, because as you could see from the pictures, if you're not careful, bad things can happen. And yeah, there have been stories of people who have died on Angel's Landing because maybe they slipped and fell. Maybe they went when it was raining and slippery. And again, I lucked out. The weather was nice. Nothing that I saw along my entire route suggested anyone was in any sort of trouble, but you never know. And what if it's really hot outside? I mean, it could end badly. So one of the stories I came across in 2006, but look at this from the Salt Lake Tribune. Date line at the top there, 2006. Authorities are investigating the death of a Las Vegas woman who apparently fell 1,200 feet from Angel's Landing on Tuesday morning while hiking with her husband. The woman is the fifth person to die on the popular hiking trail since 1983. And I remember coming across that story only in the sense of when you ask people or you look on Reddit, like, hey, have people like gotten injured? Have they died on this trail? If so, what were they doing so I can make sure I don't do that? That story came up. And the thing about that story is it doesn't really say any details about what happened to her. Did she lose the chain? Did she let go of it? Did she slip and fall? Who knows? It didn't say much. So I remember coming across that story and not thinking much of it other than, all right, well, that is a really sad story, but I'm going to take my precautions. So why do I bring this up? Well, I bring it up because there was a recent update to this story just this week, and I'm going to show it to you right here. This is the New York Times today. Ex-youth pastor charged with wife's murder 20 years after her fatal fall. The woman who died, they charged her husband with pushing her off of Angel's Landing. He was charged with doing that. So let's just pause there for a second. They were up there. I want to make sure I'm getting this information right. For some reason, a while back, like last year, investigators began reopening this case. Because I should tell you, when she died 20 years ago, they did a 3-month investigation into what happened. And as far as everyone could tell, it was an accident. They ruled it accidental, and there's not much else you could do at that point. What made that story interesting is that the husband, his story was, we went there early. We started the hike before sunrise because we wanted to see the sunrise at the top of Angel's Landing. And we got there. And this guy says, I was like going through my backpack to find something because I wanted to take a picture of her as the sun was rising. And the next thing I heard was a scream, and she was gone. She slipped and fell. And they were the only ones on Angel's Landing at that point. And the park rangers found the body. There's not much else you could do at that point. They looked into it and they're like, okay, it was an accident. We don't have any proof of anything else happening. It was their 10th anniversary, by the way. That's why they went to Angel's Landing. And that's it. And her family, the woman's family, actually said they had comfort in knowing it was an accident because, I mean, what was the alternative? You know what I mean? But the weird thing about it is her family kept saying, she's a good hiker. She knows how to take precautions. Why would she go to the edge at all? That's not a thing she does. That's kind of weird. And so sometime last year or something, there was reason to reopen the case into this guy because a lot of things about his story were not adding up. And this is where the story gets really weird. So here's what the investigators found. The husband, his name is David Vandermeer, he said they were taking pictures as the sun came up. But the 911 call that he made, because you get phone reception up there, the 911 call that he made to the cops, it was made half an hour before sunrise. That's kind of weird. Like the sun would not have been up. So that's weird. Also, park rangers said the spot where she supposedly fell, that's not one of the more dangerous parts of Angel's Landing. There are parts that are genuinely scary and where people have died. She wasn't in one of those. The spot where she fell was like a relatively safe area. So that's weird. What else was there? Oh, a couple of months before I think they went on that hiking trip, he upped their life insurance policy by a lot, which is also interesting. And then after she died, and after he received the life insurance money, he bought a new home that was nearly 3 times the size and 3 times the cost of where he lived with her. So that's interesting too. So why are they investigating this? Well, in 2015, this is about a decade after the woman's death, there were kids who attended this guy's church where he was a youth pastor. These kids were grown up and they started telling the lead pastor, hey, remember that guy who used to work here or maybe still work there? I'm not sure. He's very inappropriate toward us. They said he would steal things and brag about it. Like, I think he's defrauding people. They also said there were stories of sexual abuse. And in 2022, the pastor goes to law enforcement in 2022 and says, you might want to look into this guy. And they couldn't figure anything out. So they closed the investigation. But last year, they reopened the case because one of his victims came forward and actually started saying some stuff. And guess what they found out about this dude? First of all, I want to make sure I'm saying all this correctly. I want to share with you this right here. This is what the pastor said. More than 3 years later, Barry Diamond, a senior pastor at a church where David Vandermeer had worked, told authorities he believed the death was not an accident and that David pushed Bernadette. I mentioned the 911 call that happened before the sun came up. The only accidents that have occurred have been suspicious in nature or deemed a suicide. It wasn't a normal place where she fell. And then here we go. Late last year, authorities received new information indicating that David Vandermeer had been having an extramarital relationship at the time of his wife's death. His lover was 16 and a member of his church youth group when they began having sex. I don't love that they use the word lover there, though that may be the word in the affidavit. He was sexually abusing a child then. And look at this. Sometime in 2004 or 2005, before the Angel's Landing incident, David Vandermeer told the child, identified by the initials SH, that the only way they could be together would be if his wife were dead. And then he allegedly pushed her off the mountain. And then he married the child in 2008. She was of age at that time, I think, but they divorced in 2014. David had a lot to lose if his wife found out about the relationship. David stood to lose his job as a youth pastor due to the infidelity. He stood to lose his marriage. Based on her age, at the time it was physical, David faced possible criminal charges and being a registered sex offender. The girl broke up with him the night before he left for Zion with his wife. David knew his wife was unhappy, and they had talked of divorce. David knew his wife was suspicious of the infidelity and was catching on. And when he was having the affair, he bought $150,000 life insurance for himself and his wife. Months later, he added $400,000 in coverage. Oh my God, the plot thickens. So the story here is he's allegedly abusing a child who he wants to marry. She breaks up with him. He goes hiking with his wife. He allegedly murders her, pushes her off. No one knows anything about this for years. He marries the then child. He marries her later on. And since then, he's been like married and divorced a few different times. He apparently runs a yoga studio. That was his job now. So there's him doing yoga in 2018. So he's just living his best life because no one knew about any of this entire time. All of this is happening. But now that they have the testimony from that girl, he was taken into custody. And where did this go? I just want to make sure I'm getting this bit. He was charged with insurance fraud for the life insurance policies. He was arrested and he was awaiting extradition to Utah. And let me just share this. This is from the New York Times article. Investigators reopened the case. I told you that. He had been using his position at his church New Song to groom kids. One of those children was SH. The couple had sex at the church after hours and at pay-by-the-hour hotels. Don't say sex. He victimized her. He assaulted her. He raped her. And it was only in 2006 when she broke things off. So this guy was taken into custody because now prosecutors believe the death was not an accident, right? So now he's going to go to trial for that and for the abuse of a child. And then guess what? As I was putting together this story for this thing right here, for this live stream, there was another update that I need to share with you, which is this headline from Backpack, which is an excellent website. This is from today. Man accused of pushing wife off of Angel's Landing found dead before court date. This guy was about to have his trial. He was going to go to court for all of this that we now know about. Somehow, he took his own life. David Vandermeer, a former youth pastor charged with pushing his wife off of Zion National Park's Angel's Landing during a sunrise hike in 2006, died in an apparent suicide ahead of his first court date. So, I don't know what happened. The police found what they described as self-inflicted injuries. I don't know how that happens. You're already in custody. I don't know how you're allowed to do an Epstein or something when you should have people watching you. But disturbing end to a very disturbing story that was already disturbing for very different reasons. It's such, I don't even know what to make of that, because it seems like this guy knew that for 20 years he had kept this secret, and now, finally, everyone was finding out what had actually happened, and now he's taking the coward's way out. I don't know. All that's to say, I first heard about this dude years ago because I wanted to go on Angel's Landing, and I still would go back there. It's still beautiful. None of this is a knock on Angel's Landing, which is beautiful. But I'm so disturbed to hear that one of the most beautiful places in the country is now marred by this story of this guy who used it as part of his weird little revenge plot. I don't know what happens. There's no trial now because there's no one to convict, I guess. I don't know what justice there is for the victims or justice. Think about the woman's family, his wife, her family that thought, okay, at least it was an accident. Now they got to deal with, oh my God, it was her husband the whole time. And now we can't even face him. He's not going to see any justice. Just a horrible system all around. I know, like, yeah, at least he's saving time and tax dollars in the court system. But again, I want to see people like that get justice. and now he won't get justice. He's just dead. Mostly this was a story that I could use to tell you about Angel's Landing, but I didn't know he had taken his life until I was like right before this podcast. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I will take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, I think I'm done for tonight. Just looking around to see if there's anything else. I will stop it there. Listen, despite everything I said, if you ever get a chance to hike and do Angel's Landing, you should. It's gorgeous. Would go back in a heartbeat. If any of you are going and you want a buddy to hike with, hit me up. Would go back. It's great. Scary, but great. Okay, I think I'm done for tonight. I will be back this time next week. I will hopefully see you all then. And I'll hopefully have more fun stories next week. All right, everybody. I will, you know the drill. Go subscribe, friendlyatheist.com. Support the channel, patreon.com/Emmett. I appreciate all that. And I'll see you next week. Have a good one.